So we started to talk about wireless security last time. So we talked about the basic characteristics that made really wireless security worthy of special treatment in terms of security mechanisms. And we talked about the reasons for this, including the autonomous mobility of wireless devices, the accidental association, and so on. So that generated a set of threats which are briefed or summarized in this guidelines document by NIST, اللي هو document SP 800-14. So they talked about, again, this actually kind of confirms and summarizes what we have talked about before. So the lack of physical security control, we said that these wireless devices are deployed in the environment and sometimes unattended, and that facilitates some kind of physical attacks on these wireless devices. So somebody can get a hold of these wireless devices and can hack it and perform some attacks from these devices. Also, use of untrusted mobile devices. The idea here is that how can the organization trust any incoming device to the perimeters of the wireless network or the network infrastructure? What are the policies? Do we have to enforce some kind of configuration on these wireless devices in terms of confirming or guaranteeing that the antivirus is updated and so on and so forth? Or should we allow some guest access? Should we disallow some guest access? Things like that. Should we allow guests to actually connect on a certain wireless access network different from the authorized user access, similar to what we have here? So what are the specific policies related to external devices versus internal devices, and so on and so forth? Also, use of untrusted networks. So we talked about this scenario where you have even our internal devices. If you are traveling somewhere and you are connecting to the organization's network from an external network, which this network in many cases untrusted, so there is a chance that by accessing this untrusted network, so somebody can get a hold of your wireless device or the application or the content on your device and use it to actually attack the network here. So should we allow the internal users connecting from an external network to be able to use the services inside our organization? What are the policies and the configurations by which we can allow internal users to access the organization's network from an external network? The use of untrusted content, as we said, now with our wireless devices, we can access QR codes, barcodes, things like that, which can contain some malicious content, and we can read hundreds of these characters by just one point to the QR code, and we can read lots of content which can be malicious to our devices. Use of applications created by unknown parties, should we allow any internal user to kind of download or set up any application from the application store, from the app store? So which app store application providers should we trust and which ones we should not trust? Should we have app stores accessible to all the internal users to kind of set up any kind of application, or we should have some restrictions on that? Interaction with other systems. So our again, internal users, they may have access to through some personal use or through some corporate use, like for example to OneDrive or to Dropbox or something like that. So they can synchronize some malicious content that they can download on these wireless devices, and it can compromise the wireless device, in which case it can be used for attacks and so on. So all of these, or the use of location services, like for example, so our wireless devices, they are by default equipped with location services. So you can get the location of the user at any point of time and launch some attacks which are specific to that particular location. Like, for example, you can send him some ads based on his location and stuff like that. These ads, like this adware, may contain, okay, so we have some discounts here and there and stuff like that. So click on this URL, and we click on this URL, and off you go. So, so these types of threats and attacks have been facilitated by the autonomous mobility of these wireless devices, and the fact that these wireless devices are ubiquitous, which means that they can access content from anywhere at any point of time. Okay, so these ultimate mobility and autonomy created these types of threats, which are really unique to wireless services in particular. So by that, we need to have some security elements that we can use to secure wireless access. So this is the wireless device. So the wireless device itself needs to be secured physically, in which case it should not be left unattended to facilitate some kind of physical attacks. If we need to access any application service from the network infrastructure or from the distributed system, we need to do that through some secure tunnels. Okay, so we'll talk about this in IPsec in the next chapter. Also, we can have corporate firewalls. Corporate firewalls, here we talk about system level security. We'll talk about this in chapter 10. So where we have like some rules and policies and stuff like that, which again restricts any kind of access, whether it's from wireless device or anything, to the network infrastructure. We can have like some configuration servers, and these types of configuration servers, they maintain and enforce all security policies and configurations. Okay, so we can restrict some policies, whether on passwords, on the use of access of the files or anything like that, or configurations in terms of we can enforce the latest update of the antivirus, the latest update of all the patches and stuff like that, before we can give access to the network infrastructure from any wireless device. And of course, we have the authentication and access control server, which facilitates the device authentication and user authentication. We talked about that in previous chapter, where we talked about the 802.1x and the extensible authentication protocol, which acts as a transport service to multiple authentication protocols like TLS or TTLS. We talked about this, or IKE or something like this. So we call this the radius server. If you remember, we call this the radius server, and we talked about the handshaking and the messages that are being exchanged to facilitate the authentication. The result of this authentication is always to have like some kind of a master key or a semi-permanent key through which you can get all the transient keys and the temporary session keys that you can use for secure communication. Okay? Any questions so far? All right, so in this part, so this chapter is actually divided into 3 parts. And the first part has just finished. And in this part, we talked about the basic and unique characteristics in wireless that facilitated the special treatment in terms of wireless access for security mechanisms. In the next part, this next part is just a review. Supposedly, it's a review for wireless 802.11. So we'll talk about the protocols, the wireless protocols 802.11, which will allow us to prepare for the third part of the chapter, where we talk about specific wireless security service protocols, which are, the WEP and WPA and WPA2 and so on. Okay, so this part of the chapter is just a review. Supposedly, this information one way or another. Of course, 802.11, 802 is actually a committee under the IEEE, which has developed the standards for wide range of local area networks in general. whether it's wired or wireless, right? Like, for example, we talked about 802.3 for Ethernet, right, which is wired, 802.2 for logical link control, and so on. Of course, there is a class of these standards which is a 802.11 something. 802.11 starts with B, and then G, and then A, and then AC, and then P, and all, and the list goes on, right? So in the early 90s, the 802.11 subgroup, they actually came up with the first wireless standard, which is 802.11b. They never would have thought the wide range of adoption to this. They discovered that people were really hungry of adopting any kind of wireless technology. So the wide adoption of this first set of standard was actually exploding all over the place. Of course, vendors have started to develop lots and lots of products using the 802.11b, and this is like the first standards for wireless. If you remember, 802.11b supports like 11 megabits per second. It's not like huge data rates, but people were really hungry to adopt any kind of wireless technology because it facilitates, as we said, the ultimate mobility and ubiquity and so on and so forth. So since that time, the demand for wireless LANs have actually exploded in an almost uncontrolled way. They started to streamline the standard, and they started to form a consortium. They did lots of things to try to streamline the process of standardization of these wireless protocols, and that's what we will talk about. So in terms of the terminology for 802.11, they actually they defined some set of terminology. So of course, the access point uses the coordination function to try to coordinate the wireless access, and for that they support the wireless access through what we call logical ports, logical access ports, and of course the access point together with multiple stations, they form what we call basic service set. The basic service set, we'll see that in the graph in a minute. The basic service set is composed of one access point and multiple stations. And we call this infrastructure wireless. Infrastructure wireless, where all the wireless access, all the data transfer must go through the access point. Okay? So stations, they have to communicate directly to the access point. They cannot communicate between each other without the engagement of the access point. We call that a infrastructure wireless. Of course, in a big organization like QU or something like this, we could have multiple access points. These multiple access points are connected through what we call a distribution system. So if two stations connect to the same access point, they want to communicate with each other, then these stations will have to send to each other through the access point, right?
What do you mean by station?
Workstation يعني أو laptop or هم they call it a station. هم هنا they call it a station or a node or.
So basic service set is what?
Is access point. It's actually a sub system which is composed of one access point and multiple stations. We'll see this in the graph in a second. Okay, I'm just going through the terminology now, and then we'll see that. Okay. The coordination function is the logical function that it's done by the access point to facilitate this wireless access, right? So there is one coordination which is sort of centralized in one basic service set, which is implemented inside the access point, okay? Extended, we talked about distribution system. Distribution system, in many ways, it could be like wired network, the wired backbone network that connects all the access points together. Right? واضح كده? So it's the core network that interconnects all these access points. So if one station on one access point wants to communicate with another station on another access point, that goes through the LAN, distribution system. It has to go through the distribution system. طيب, so extended service set بقى is connected of multiple basic service sets that are interconnected together through the distribution system. Okay, so extended service set is multiple basic service sets. And of course, we have the MAC protocol data unit. The MAC protocol data unit is composed of what? Composed of the MAC header and the payload. The MAC header and the payload. The payload itself is called the MAC service data unit. So,
Now, does it mean message authentication protocol, message of authentication port?
This part has nothing to do with security. Here, we're just talking about wireless protocols. Okay, so you will see some mention of security here and there, but this part focuses on just giving you a brief about the wireless protocols themselves. And the third part, we'll talk about wireless security protocols. So as we said, the MAC protocol data unit, and as we said, protocol data unit is the name for the data unit in any layer, right? So when we say MAC protocol data unit, we mean the protocol data unit in the MAC layer. Okay, so this actually composed of course, the MAC header and the payload. This payload is called the service data unit. Okay. Okay, كده? So that's what this means. And of course, the station, as I said, the station is the wireless node. Okay, so this is how it looks like. Okay, so this graph is worth 1,000 words. So this actually gives you the whole picture. So you have multiple stations connected to one access point. So that's a basic service set. So this is a basic service set, right? So if two basic service sets are connected through the distribution system, we call this a extended service set, right? So this is extended service set. There's also something that's not existing here, which is we called about distribution, okay, or distribution system. There's also the concept of integration. Okay, integration here talks about the fact that if a station here wants to talk to the internet back, which is outside of the extended service set, okay, talk to another wireless LAN which is outside the organization aslan, okay, so it wants to connect to 5G or 4G or another network over the internet or to Uridu and stuff like that. This is called the integration. So communication through from one basic service set to another, we call that a distribution, or we call this communication through the distribution system. Yeah. Okay. Integration here refers to the fact that a station wants to connect to the internet. Okay, واضح? Any questions so far? Okay. As we said, based on the very wide adoption of the wireless protocols, they started to form a consortium. At the beginning, they called it حتى إيه, because they were very, very concerned about the compatibility, because lots of vendors started to produce some products using 802.11b, and some of these products were not even compliant to the standard. So they started to form the consortium, which is called WICA, or Wireless Ethernet Compatibility Alliance. So that consortium was actually focusing on certification and verifying the compatibility of these wireless products, wireless-based products that these vendors come up with. Later on, this alliance was called Wi-Fi. At the beginning, this called WICA, and then later on, they moved to Wi-Fi. So when they solved the compatibility issue, they started to form what we call Wi-Fi alliance, where they focused on producing other standards, which started with 802.11g, and then A, and then N, and then AC, and P, and all of this, and I, which is the one that we will talk about in the third part. ماشي كده؟ So Wi-Fi 5 here refers to again standards in the 5 gigahertz, because the Wi-Fi itself, if you some of you may know that 802.11g, it actually standardizes wireless access in a 2.4 gigahertz, right? But Wi-Fi 5 here focuses on 802.11a. 802.11a works in 5G, 5 gigahertz, all right? And then later on, of course, they kind of combine both. So now, like, for example, at our houses, the wireless routers, they actually use both. They use 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. And you can configure some nodes at home to work on 5G or 5G and gigahertz, and 2.4 gigahertz based on your node. Okay? طيب. When they came up with the standards for 802.11g, okay, they started with B even. With B, they had to come up with some security aspect, right? So it doesn't. It's not logical that these stations they start to talk with the access point without any kind of security. So at the beginning, they came up with what we call WEP, okay, or they call it wired equivalent protocol, okay. So this WEP supports primitive functionality for security, and as we will talk about it in the third part, it's easily breakable. So WEP, which uses like passphrase, which is the one that we see on our wireless routers at home, just password. So they came up with WEP, which turned out to be breakable in few minutes. So there is a piece of software on Kali Linux. There's a small assignment that you usually do for undergrad students, where they run software on Kali Linux to kind of sniff the passphrases, assuming that the access point is configured to use WEP. And we'll talk about why this is easy to break. So when they came up with 802.11g, they standardized what we call WPA. Okay, so WPA is some kind of a software upgrade to WEP, because it turned out to be a disaster basically. So they came up with WPA, which is like a quick fix, a quick software fix for WEP. But again, I mean, WPA just by software upgrade is not enough. So WPA also turned out to be breakable. Of course, it's not as easy as WEP, but still, I mean, it's still breakable, relatively easy. Okay, so in a later stage, they came up with 802.11i, which is like a hardware kind of upgrade back. It's not like a software fix. And we'll talk about these three things later. So basically, when we talk about the access control layer, which is composed of these three sublayers, as we know from network one, these two sublayers, they form what we call a So logical link control and MAC access control, they form ايه بقى اللي هم بنسميها ايه؟ Data link layer, right? So this is the data link layer and the physical layer. So data link layer and physical layer, both they call the network access control. So here in this figure, we talk about the basic functionality of each of these sublayers, and then the specific functionality related to wireless for each of these sublayers, right? So this is the basic, which exists whether it's wireless, wired, anything, okay? And this is the specific functionality for wireless. And as we've been telling you, and turns out to be a fact, for network one, that logical link control is network agnostic or medium agnostic, صح? We've been telling you this in network one. It's a medium agnostic sublayer. So logical link control here, which is 802.2, it's actually, it does not depend on what type of medium you're using, right? Whether it's fiber optics or wired or wireless, it doesn't care about that. Its own functionality is actually for flow control and error control from the data link layer point of view. So in that case, it's medium agnostic. And that's why you see here, there's no specific functionality for wireless that corresponds to logical link control because it's medium agnostic. So flow control and air control works whether it's wireless, wired, fiber optics, doesn't matter, right? But when it comes to medium access control, so medium access control is responsible for organizing the multi-axis, okay, in a shared medium, right? So this is this actually performs by error detection, medium access in terms of multi-axis to a shared medium. But for wireless, there is specific functionality for wireless when it comes to medium access control, which we also taught you in the undergrad. So when we talked about multi-axis techniques, right? So we said that multi-axis kind of imposes the concept of collision, right? صح? So for wireless, what's specific about this? So what's specific about multi-axis that does not exist in the wired domain? So when we talked about the concept of collision, right? So in wired LANs, right? So in wired LANs, can we detect this collision? We can detect this collision, right? So we can detect this collision and we can deal with it, okay? So that's why we in wired LANs, we use the carrier sense multiple access with collision detection, right? In wireless, can we detect collision? No, so we cannot detect collision for many reasons which we talked about. So in that case, we have to use a collision avoidance, and that's specific to wireless, which does not exist in wired, and that's why we have to deal with collision avoidance in a totally separate way. So that's why MAC, there are some specific functions for wireless which are different from the wired domain, right? Of course, for physical layer, it's very much medium dependent. So we use channel coding and source coding and stuff like that in general. But for wireless, we have to deal with RF, right? Modulation and demodulation and things like that, which we don't have to do it for normal signals. Normal signals, we use baseband processing. There's no need for RF or modulation or something like this. So here, we have to think about broadband communication where we have to talk about RF and so on. Okay? So these are the specific functions when it comes to wireless. And of course, the only exception for this is logical link control, which is medium agnostic. It's not dependent on the medium. Okay? واضح كده؟ This is a crash review for network 1. So this is the protocol data unit. So this is the MAC protocol data unit. As we said, it's composed of the MAC header and the MAC trailer, which is the frame check sequence. And here in wireless specifically, they use the concept of CRC or cyclic redundancy codes for frame check sequence. We talked about the generic format for any data link layer. So here in the MAC header, we have to use the MAC control. We talked briefly about this in network 1. So this MAC control is used for, it's actually the logical link control header basically, where we have to do the error control and flow control and stuff like that. And then in the MAC layer, the minimum is to store the MAC address for the source and the MAC address for the destination. And here the payload contains the MAC service data. When we say service data unit, we mean the payload part of the protocol data unit. ماشي كده؟ So this is just terminology, some terminology. Okay, so this is the table which shows the set of functions for any wireless LANs and where they are actually implemented or where they are running. So for example, so here we have, if we want to focus on functions which have to do with security, so this is authentication, of course, is part of security, right? De-authentication also is part of security, تبعية طبعا. And of course privacy. So that's why you see these security related functions, they have a LAN access and security. LAN access and security. LAN access and security. Right? So they refer to some security aspect as well. So association is a function that requires the station to associate itself to one of the access points. You may be in the range of multiple access points. صح? So, but you have to associate to one of them, right? And that's why this function is actually implemented in the distribution system, because you have to kind of coordinate which station connects to which access point. So so the distribution system here has to manage how these access points can like for example broadcast their SSIDs and stuff like that. اللي هي احنا we call it the discovery phase. So a station, when it exists in a specific location, it reads all the available access points, right? And then whether automatically or manually, you have to associate yourself to one of these access points. So that has to go through the distribution system. And of course, reverse to that is the deassociation. And there's the concept of distribution, of course, which here we talk about data transfer. But when it comes to data transfer from one access point to another, or from one basic service set to another, in that case, we call it distribution. And there's the concept of integration, which is what I talked about. So here, it's not from one basic service set to another. Here, it's from one station to the internet, to another network altogether, right? So in that case, we call it integration, okay? There is the concept of reassociation as well. By reassociation here, we mean that a node may actually move from one location to another. By moving from one location to another, there may be some reassociation where the node actually associates itself to another access point. Okay, so it moves from one access point to another. And this reassociation, by the way, is of course, it's a distribution system because it has to go through the distribution system. And in some way, this might be complex because there is the concept of the handoff, right? So when you move from one access point to another, right, there's the concept of a handoff where you have to release all the resources from one access point and re-establish these resources to another access point. Okay, so this process might be done in a hard way or soft way. Hard way, I mean إن هو يعني when you do the reassociation, then you send to one access point to clear the resources, and then to send to another access point to establish new resources. This process takes time, and in that case, the service might be disrupted. So if you are having a call, مثلا on WhatsApp, and then you perform the reassociation in a hard way, right? Sometimes the call will get disconnected or will get disrupted, right? So that's why they tend to use what we call soft handoff. Soft handoff, they kind of use some kind of prediction that if you are moving in a certain direction, then you have to establish the resources on the access point, the new access point first, before you clear the access point that you currently exist in. Okay, so this is called a soft handoff. Okay, so first you establish, and then you clear. In that case, you don't have to go through service disruption. So that can be done easily if we're talking about one extended service set. So for extended service set, it can be done easily. For integration, if you are just moving away from the wireless LAN altogether, from the extended service set, and you're going through the internet, you are doing handoff between the wireless LAN and 5G. Okay, so that kind of handoff, usually it's hard. It cannot be done easily using soft handoff, and in that case, in many ways, you have to go through service disruption. So that's why you notice, يعني if you are having مثلا WhatsApp call or any kind of wireless access, and you are driving with your car and getting outside QU مثلا, okay, after some time, or حتى getting outside of your home, right? In many ways, you have to get some time where the service gets disrupted. I'm sure many of you have actually encountered this. ماشي? So this is the concept or the difference between integration and distribution. So by integration here, we enable the transfer of data between a station 802.11 and any other technology over the internet, whether it's about 4G, 5G, Ethernet, or anything. ماشي? So it takes care of any address bar translation and media conversion, and in many cases, the integration, if you are doing handoff through integration, that requires some kind of service disruption. Distribution here, the primary service used for stations to exchange PDUs within the same extended service set. Okay, so that has to go through distribution system. So the concept of association here can have like three different types. There is no transition meaning that a station is actually moving, but it's moving within the range of one access point. So in that case, you don't have to do any transition, right? So in that case, usually service is not disrupted, service is continuous, and there's no handoff needed, really. That's why we call it no transition. So if we're talking about basic service set transition, so we're moving from one basic service set to another, from one access point to another. In which case, in this case, the delivery of data to the station requires that the addressing capability be able to recognize the new location and station. And in many cases, this can be done without any service disruption. Okay, يعني, at least if the network is sustainable, is configured properly. In many ways, sometimes we have this service disruption here at QU when we move from one location to another. I'm sure some of you have noticed this. But usually this is because of the fact that you are going through some blind spot which is not covered by any access point. But if you're actually moving from the coverage of one access point to another, usually the handoff is done in a soft way, and in that case you don't have any service disruption. ماشي؟ You are following or بس كده خلاص؟ Following, huh? ماشي؟
There is no animation about the wireless controller, because the transition, the mobility, all of these functionality should be managed. Even there is wireless controller that control all the access points to.
Well, this exists in the distribution system.
So the distribution system.
Of course, the distribution system. We didn't talk about the details inside the distribution system. Okay, in the distribution system, there are some servers which are responsible for what we say now, right? Which is we call it the core network. In the core network, there are some core servers which are. This actually requires some kind of management as well. So sometimes, if you are in an enterprise like this, you can control which station connects to which access point. Not only that, depending on the location and the density of the stations in this area, there are lots of things, and there could be lots of issues. They call it service management or resource allocation. You have to go through some resource allocation. And there is the extended service set transition, where we actually transition from one extended service set to another, okay, which involved the concept of integration in that case. So in that case, we have to, disruption of the service is likely to occur. Okay, so if we are transitioning back from wireless LAN to 5G or to 4G, usually that requires some service disruption. This service disruption can be minimized or can be eliminated through some service level agreements between the organization and the service provider or the telecom provider. It can be, right? So you can sort of go through some soft handoff from one technology to another, but that requires some complicated service level agreement between مثلا QU and Ooredoo and things like that. Okay, but usually it has to go through service disruption. طيب. So to deliver a message within a distributed system, the distribution service needs to know the identity of the access point, okay, to which the message should be delivered to. So there are three services related to association, which is the association establishes an initial association between the station and the access point, and we'll talk about the details of this, because that part actually is where the authentication process happens, okay, or the authentication part. And authentication part is the first step for security, right? There's the concept of reassociation, which involves the handoff or the transition, okay? And this enables an established association to be transferred from one access point to another, okay? And as we said, this can be done in software or hardware. ماشي؟ تفضل.
And this software, like two access points are talking to each other, or
They talk to each other through the distribution system, yes.
So who have the where is the software exist in the access point itself? Or
Yes.
the distribution system?
Well, هو يعني there is the coordination function in each access point, and there is the core function which exists in the distribution system, which exists in some core servers, right? So each access point will have to connect or will have to talk to some core network servers, and this communication decides about whether we have a soft handoff, hard handoff, how the resources are managed, how much resources you have in the first access point, how much you will have in the next access point. Should I allocate the resources in the next one before I clear this one, or the other way around? So this has to be controlled by the distribution system. So there is the coordination function, which it's like a software process that runs on the access point, and there is the a process that runs on the core server, right? So these processes, they have to do by lots of handshaking, okay? And there could be like some algorithms or mechanisms inside the core network that makes a certain decision how much resources you had, how much resources you will have, whether you are admitted, you are secure, things like that, right? And it can involve also some configuration servers, huh? We said that it can involve actually some configuration servers as well, where we have to enforce all security policies, configurations, things like that. So all of this has to be done before we allow you to move from one access point to another. And of course, the deassociation, which happens, yani, if you get outside the perimeter of the wireless LAN, so you can you perform deassociation. And deassociation here, it does not involve handoff. You just clear the resources. So you notify the access point to clear the resources assigned to this station. That's it. Right. So that's the end of the second part, right? So in the second part, here is just some review, crash review about wireless protocols in general, not related specifically to security. So in the third part, we talk about the wireless security. So for wireless security here, as we said, in 802.11b came up with WEP, or what we call wired equivalent privacy. Okay, so this was the first primitive security protocol for wireless, and that was only based on like some passphrase, and that's it. Okay, so if the station, if you connect for the first time, then we ask you to write the passphrase. If the passphrase is correct, of course, we can do that through some, as we said before, you don't have to send the passphrase through plain text, but what we do is that we generate a pre-shared key based on this passphrase, and the station sends a puzzle with this pre-shared key to the access point, and then the access point can verify or authenticate the station based on whether this pre-shared key is created correctly, which is based, of course, on the passphrase, right? On knowing the passphrase. So if the passphrase is correct, the access point can decrypt the puzzle and can verify the station. So it's very, very easy. But we'll talk about the problem here. Okay? Then, of course, as we said, 802.11g came with, when I say came with, it doesn't mean that it's part of the standard, right? So it's around the same time. So when they came up with when the subgroup of 802.11, okay, G came up with the standard for 11G, the security subgroup they came up with around the same time. They came up with like a software upgrade or a software hack to WEP, because it turned out to be highly breakable, easily breakable. So they came up with WPA, and we'll talk about the difference for WPA. And then بقى in a later stage you came up with 802.11i, which is a complete wireless standard which leverages بقى ايه the it's a hardware upgrade of course, but it requires بقى the use of wireless access network access control security, which is what we talked about, which involves بقى the use of 802.1x and the extensible authentication protocol, right? So these two did not use that. These two did not use the network access control security in any way. So they have used their own security authentication mechanism, okay? But in a later stage, they combined this security authentication mechanism with the 802.1x and the extensible authentication protocol to perform the authentication in a holistic way بقى. Okay, so that one is really is highly secure يعني. Okay, and this one is not يعني breakable easily in that case. أيوة.
Does it mean that the implementation of security mechanisms in hardware is more stronger than implementing this security mechanism in software?
لا that doesn't mean this. لا هو الفكرة إن هو the use of extensible authentication protocol and the 802.1x would not be done easily using like a software patch or a software upgrade like this. لا يعني it requires like some hardware upgrade because there has to be like some kind of a يعني you are right in a way يعني a chip or something that performs this authentication, which is built بقى على الايه على network card, right? So that's how the wired devices they do it. يعني wireless devices they actually perform اللي هو 802.1x and extensible authentication protocol. That's actually built on the wired card اللي هو Ethernet card, right? So that also had to be done the same way. So you have to have like some kind of hardware upgrade, both بقى on the station and the access point. Okay, and of course the authentication server as well. So you have to have authentication server, and remember the authentication server uses different authentication mechanisms, whether it's TLS, IKE. We talked about this, right? So all of these components have to exist. Okay. For these two, we didn't have to do that. We didn't have to have authentication server. We didn't have to have all these complications, right? But here, we have to do this. In this case, we have to do this. So just in brief, of course, one thing we notice here is that for wireless, because of the channel impairments, there is a motivation for implementing like some reliable transfer with some not only error detection, with some error correction due to the high possibility of error. Due to this high possibility of error, and that's why in the assignment we motivated that by saying like if we're talking about wireless or طبعا this channel model that we have in the assignment kind of simulates channel impairments where you have like some probability of error. High probability of error. In wired, of course, the probability of error is really small. Okay, but when you increase the probability of error, we have all, I hope, we have all seen the effect of this on the security mechanism. Because especially for block ciphers, right? So block ciphers were really, really sensitive to any kind of a probability of error. But for wireless, there is inherently some high probability of error, right? And that's why what type of cipher do you think is fit in the wireless domain?
AES.
Huh? RC4. Yes. شفت بقى واحنا we came up with this conclusion because of our analysis. So yes, so RC4 seems to be more robust when it comes to errors, right? And in wireless, because of the high probability of error, at the beginning they said, okay, so we need to use RC4. But really RC4 itself, as we said, it's not robust in terms of security, صح? RC4 itself, because it's based on what? It's based on Vernam cipher. It's very simple. So the and we'll talk about the high-level picture of all these protocols, and then we'll get to the details of this. So يعني we're talking here basically about one basic service set where you have multiple stations, right? And these multiple stations, they need to authenticate themselves to an access point. Okay, so what WEP implements in terms of security for authentication. So WEP here says, okay, so either طبعا there are two modes for WEP. Either there is null security. By null security here I mean no security. So these stations, they don't even have to know the passphrase, right? So authenticate themselves by just sending, I want to associate, then fine, خلاص, associate, done. Okay? They don't need to know anything. Okay? So in that case, of course, the data transfer will not be protected, right? But of course, WEP came up with the concept of passphrase. The passphrase here is like some kind of a password, right? But this password is actually shared in the whole basic service set, which means that all these stations, they all share the same password, right? So at the beginning, WEP said, okay, so from this passphrase, we can generate directly pre-shared key. Directly, even without hashing. So at the beginning, they thought about a very simple mechanism. So they didn't even use hashing, right? But in order to make this a little bit secure, so stations, they use the pre-shared key based on the passphrase plus some initial vector. Okay? So the passphrase is actually shared between all the stations, right? And the initial vector is actually, it gets sent from the station to the access point. So what happens is that at the beginning, the station would say, so I want to request to associate with you. So the access point would say, okay, so authenticate yourself. Okay? So the station, what it does is that, because you are supposed to know the password or the passphrase, so what the station does is that it creates some kind of a puzzle with a pre-shared key, which is done using initial vector and the passphrase. And then it sends that puzzle with the initial vector to the access point. Then the access point would have the initial vector, and of course it has the passphrase, so it kind of generates the same pre-shared key, and it decrypts that puzzle, and it authenticates the station based on that. Very easy, very simple, right? What's wrong about this, or what makes this really breakable easily, is that the passphrase is shared between all the stations, right? There's no specifics about each station, and even the initial vector itself is sent in plain text. It has to be sent in plain text, not the password, of course, but the initial vector itself is sent in plain text. So that makes crypto analysis extremely easy. In fact, anyone can inject some thousands of packets to the access point, okay, with some initial vectors, and will be able to also sniff initial vectors from the current stations, and will use this huge amount of data to kind of predict the passphrase. So if you predict the passphrase, so what happens is that this pre-shared key, which is based on the initial vector and the passphrase, will be used as a seed for the RC4. Remember, RC4 is based on pseudo-random function, right? صح? It's based on pseudo-random function which generates the random sequence. This random sequence would be XORed with the data to provide the ciphertext. Vernam cipher, easy. Okay? So this is breakable by just, what the attacker needs to do here is to read as many initial vectors as possible. And حتى even if the stations are not sending any initial vector, it can inject some fake data to the access point with some initial vectors to try to have some response from the access point to try to kind of predict or to guess the passphrase, and that can be done easily. يعني in Kali Linux, I think there is a small tool كده. I think it takes about 2 minutes to come up with a passphrase. يعني. Okay. So that's a WEP. Okay. طيب. So what they did in WPA بقى, WPA, which is like a software upgrade, as we said. So here بقى, the pre-shared key is actually specific to each station, which is based on hash function, okay, which is composed of the passphrase, of course, plus the initial vector, صح, plus the MAC address, the MAC address of the station and the MAC address of the access point. Okay, so that created some kind of some security strength, a little bit. Okay, so it's hashed. You have some specifics about the access, the MAC address of this particular station, and so on. So that WPA was kind of more strong. Let's say we can break it in 5 minutes instead of 2 minutes, something like that. So, but still, it's still breakable, and that's why the use of 802.11i was kind of it's a must. Okay. But of course, as we will see, even with WPA2 or RSN or 802.11i are all the name for the same thing. So that came up with a standard which uses the concept of authentication through 802.1x, an extensible authentication protocol, and the back-end authentication server, which connects with IKE or TLS or something like this. But still, it has to be backward compatible with these protocols as well. And that's why you will see that RSN or 802.11i still backward compatible with WEP and WPA. ماشي? So any question about this? So of course, here it's the same thing. So you use the pre-shared key using RC4, and then you come up with the sequence, and that can be used to generate the cipher. In WPA2 بقى, okay, in WPA2, even after generating it's not called a pre-shared key in that case, okay? It's called master session key, and we'll talk about this, okay? So after finishing the authentication process, which is here, it's a long process بقى, صح? We talked about it. To go through 802.1x and the EAP, and to go with the backend server. So there are lots of messages that get sent back and forth to authenticate. The result would be a master session key or a semi-permanent key, right? So this key بقى, it's supposed to be used, but in that case, برضو, what they thought about is not to use RC4. Why? Because RC4 was not strong from a security perspective. It's good from error-resistant perspective, but it's not good from a security perspective. So what do you think would achieve the same objective with some security strength? Have you noticed this in the assignments? That's why I say this assignment is really important. You're supposed to really understand so many things by doing this assignment, especially if you tried that hands-on yourself. When I finish it, I'll be able to tell you. So if you remember, when it comes to comparing the performance against the error control, there was another mode of operation that CTR? AES, huh? Counter mode, yes, bravo عليك, yes, excellent, yes, you're perfectly right. So the counter mode achieves the same performance like RC4, but counter mode from a security perspective is a lot more strong. Okay, so that's why here in WPA2 they use the counter mode AES for for confidentiality, okay, instead of RC4. It's still, I mean, instead of encrypting, instead of generating بقى random sequence, لا, use AES to encrypt بقى إيه, not, you encrypt the counter, you encrypt some counters, right? And then you generate sort of a random sequence which you can get XORed with the text, okay? But doing it this way is a lot more strong in terms of security compared to RC4, okay? So in WPA2, so they implemented these two major, actually more than this, we'll see, يعني the standard is really complicated. But these are the major things that have been introduced. So they have streamlined authentication using بقى ال 802.1x and EAP, and they have used the counter mode AES for confidentiality. ماشي كده? So this is the whole picture. So now بقى we'll dig deeper into the 802.1, 802.11i or RSN or WPA2 standards, okay? So we'll see that the standard here talks about this access control, which is done through the 802.1x, okay? So 802.1x, as we said, provides the authentication from the access control, the network access control layer, okay, for multi-access LANs, if you remember from the previous chapter. So together with the authentication and key generation, which is done through the extensible authentication protocol, which provides the transport service to allow you to communicate with back-end server, which is responsible for authentication بقى, اللي هو through بقى TLS or TTLS and so on. ماشي? Using those two parts, so using the 802.1x and the extensible authentication protocol, the result here would be a master session key. ماشي? This master session key is the semi-permanent key that we can use to generate all the other keys. So why do we need multiple keys? Why do we need multiple keys?
Accessing different access points.
لا.
So what if
Why do we need multiple keys?
master session key get hacked, compromised? So it has to be
No.
temporary, or to manage because each client should have a session key with the access point, individual access.
Yeah, ma this is done. يعني each, by the way, the master session key is for each station. It's exclusive for one station.
Here, both message authentication and also key generation for these two keys or multiple keys.
Well, yes, يعني we have one key for to provide confidentiality for encryption and decryption, صح? And we have another key for what? For MAC, صح؟ اللي هو المسج authentication. يعني message authentication tag or message authentication code, right? Okay. And of course we may have other keys as well for generating like some kind of initial vectors or other things. Type. So the main thing is to use confidentiality and data origin authentication. Okay. And integrity. Integrity طبعا is done through the signatures. Signatures we use by HMAC, SHA1 and so on, right? They don't need keys, okay? But the two main functionalities for which we need keys are confidentiality and data origin authentication, which is يعني اللي هو الماc, اللي هو message authentication codes, okay? So this can be done in two ways. And why two ways? Because this TCAP is what we call a temporal key integrity protocol. This TCAP is for backward compatibility. So this actually implements RC4. This uses RC4, okay, for data transfer security. Okay, for confidentiality, it uses a RC4. And actually for authentication, it does not use 802.1x ولا الكلام ده. It uses a passphrase, either null authentication or using passphrase اللي هي WEP or WPA. Okay, so this is for backward compatibility. or we can use the اللي هو يسموه counter mode cipher block chaining MAC protocol. اهي يعني أنا برضه يعني اهي counter mode with cipher block chaining MAC protocol. Counter mode refers to the confidentiality part. Okay? And cipher block chaining refers to the generation of MAC اللي هو message authentication codes. صح؟ اللي هي for data integrity and authentication. واضح واضح؟ Okay? So counter mode is used for data transfer. And for data transfer we said that we need some error resistance, and that's why we use counter mode. But for MAC generation, that remember that for MAC, for generation of MAC for data integrity, okay, we don't need to support resistance for errors. In fact, this is used for integrity. صح? And that's why we use cipher block chaining. We don't use counter mode here, right? We don't need to have any error resistance. We use cipher block chaining because it has to be really, because it actually affects the integrity of data, right? And that's why for MAC we use cipher block chaining. If you remember, cipher block chaining was based on a chaining يعني from one data frame to another and so on. So that actually strengthens the security even more. So that's why we need cipher block chaining for MAC generation. But for data transfer, we use counter mode, which is error resistance. ماشي كده؟ طيب, so this CCMP combines the confidentiality and the message origin authentication. طيب, so confidentiality is either for the case of TKIP is done using RC4, صح? And for the case of CCMP is done using the counter mode AES. So that's what we said, right? Integrity origin authentication, it uses طبعا احنا we have here MAC is composed of two things, صح? اللي هو the generation of the signature and then the authentication part, صح? So the signature part uses a HMAC SHA-1 or the HMAC MD5. Okay, this is for the signature. Okay, and for the data origin authentication, we have to buy for the TKIP. It uses some kind of message integrity code similar to the MAC, but again uses the pre-shared key to be backward compatible. For the case of CCMP, okay, we use بقى cipher block chaining with AES. ماشي؟ واضح ولا ماشي؟ واضح؟ Okay. And then the key generation. Key generation بقى احنا قلنا يعني here from these two we come up with a master session key. The master session key, okay, is going to be exclusive to one station with the access point. Okay, and then the station with this master session key can generate by all other keys. It generates a bunch of other keys, and we'll talk here about explosion of keys. We'll see بقى يعني how many keys we need for that case. ماشي؟ طيب. So to generate this set of keys, we need some kind of a hash function. So they use the HMAC SHA-1, okay, to generate all these set of keys from the master session key. Okay, that's what we will talk about in the next few slides. So we need to talk about the set of keys that we generate from the master session key. طيب, so the process, so the phases where we have to go through in order to have eventually the protected data transfer are, the first thing is to do discovery. So in the discovery phase here talks about the fact that access points will split or broadcast the SSID. Okay. So the station will then have set of SSIDs. Whether this is done automatically or manually, the station needs to associate itself to one access point. So when it does that, okay, the process of association, okay, engages the authentication. Authentication here can be done using the three different ways that we talked about, WEP, WPA, or WPA2, right? The result here will be either pre-shared key in the case of WEP and WPA, or master session key in the case of a 802.11i. Okay? Is this enough to get us going? No. So we have to do by a key management. The key management here generates a set of keys, which we will talk about, okay, which can be used not only حتى for data transfer in unicast way. We have also multicast, we have broadcast. All of this have to be secure. So once we generate all these keys, only then we'll be able to do by some protected data transfer. So we use the relevant keys to provide protected data transfer. So that's how these phases are done. Once we are done, we terminate. That's it. Okay, so we understand all these phases?
Why can't we just simply use the master session key to encrypt the data? Why should we generate?
That's what we'll talk about in the next few slides. Phase here. Okay. Okay. So let's maybe have 5 minutes stretching لأن starting from here يعني الدنيا هتسوق شوية. طيب, so we'll start to talk about the phases in the previous slide, but in a lot more protocol handshaking details. So it starts with the fact that a station wants to associate itself to a particular access point. So it sends just a request. I want to get associated with you. Just a very simple request. So in that case, the access point will start to negotiate. The first thing will start to negotiate the security configuration. So if you are setting up your access point to use WEP or WPA or something like this, so the access point will send this information back to the station and ask the station to start to authenticate itself using one of these three ways. Okay. So the station will start to authenticate itself. So the first thing, this is the minimum, which is null authentication, and this is provided in 802.11i, as I said, for a backward compatibility. So the station will use the open system authentication request. So this actually uses null authentication, which means no authentication, or it can use the passphrase mechanism for the case of WEP or WPA. Okay, so this gets sent to the access point. The access point will respond back if it was able to authenticate the station, either using null authentication or if it was able to decrypt the puzzle using the correct passphrase, in which case it can authenticate the station. So at this point, the station was successful in terms of authenticating itself. So now it sends back the authentication request, and this authentication request is needed now to establish the parameters. يعني some parameters related مثلا to what channel to be used, things like that. Okay, so here at this point, the association could be done completely, right, based on the security mechanism that was communicated here. So if it's WEP or WPA, then at this point we're done, right? If it's WPA2, then these messages will be null authentication for backward compatibility, and then we'll start the phase of authentication using 802.11i, which will involve a 802.1x with EAP, okay, that has to go through the radius server or the authentication server. So this part here is where the authentication messages will be exchanged using certificates, using IKE, using TLS, using whatever. So this part here is where the actual authentication is done through TLS, TTLS, IKE, pre-shared key, or anything like that. ماشي? So once we are done with this, then this part, as we said, this part is based on whether we are using WPA2 or not. If we're not using WPA2, then this part will not be done. Okay? If it's WPA2, then we have to go through this phase. Here, the result here is that the authentication part is being done, which means that here we have either pre-shared key or master session key. But as we notice, still the control port A blocked. So why is not open? Why the port is not open in this case? We are done with the authentication, but we have to go through a. Once we come up with these, are we done? We have to go through a phase, another phase, which is ايه؟ لا هو خلاص authentication is done from both sides. خلاص كده authentication is done from both sides. Okay, so we generated the pre-shared key or the master session key. What else do we need to do? أيوة أيوة the key generation for the session keys بقى صح. Okay, so there is so that's why here you see the port is still blocked. Even here the port is still blocked. Okay, so we have to go through the next phase for key generation. طيب. So this explains this concept. So this summarizes this concept of controlled ports versus uncontrolled ports. So when we talk about controlled ports could be used for, and control port here could be a physical port if we're talking about Ethernet, wired access, or logical port in the case of wireless. For both cases, control port could be used for data transfer. Could be used for data transfer only if it's unblocked, right? Controlled معناها it could be blocked or unblocked, right? If it's blocked, cannot be used for data transfer. If it's unblocked, can be used for data transfer. طيب. Uncontrolled port are used to exchange control information, but not to be used for data transfer, right? Which is مثلا the port, yeah, from access point to the authentication server. From the access point to the authentication server, we call this port uncontrolled port because it can be used to transfer authentication messages, صح? But it cannot be used for data transfer. Cannot be used for data transfer. So this is the uncontrolled port. Okay? واضح كده? So the control port can be used for both, but it can be used for data transfer only if it's unblocked. Only if it's unblocked. طيب. Yeah, so this is the same slide again. I don't know why it's repeated, but anyway. As we said, the result is either pre-shared key or master session key. So the pre-shared key is done outside the 802.11i. يعني it's using WEP or WPA. Okay? The master session key is what we generate if we were to use the 802.11i going through the process of authentication with 802.1x and EAP and so on. Okay? طيب. There is pairwise master key. طب هو master session key وبعدين pairwise master key. طب why do we need to go from this to this? There is a reason which I had to dig deeper in order to know why do we need to do this. The reason for this the reason for this is that this master session key is the result of what? Is the result of authentication using different authentication methods, صح? Okay? Based on these authentication methods would lead to different size of key. Okay? So IKE, for example, the authentication would generate a master session key of size 128 bits, صح? But TLS generates a master session key of 256, something like that, right? Can we use different sizes of keys for data transfer? It has to be unified, صح? So what happens is that the pairwise master key, it's actually a result of a hash function based on the master session key together with the MAC of the station and the MAC of the access point. واضح كده؟ And by hash here, I mean the hash takes a variable size message and it generates a fixed size. Fixed size, right? واضح كده؟ So by doing this process, I make sure that the pairwise master key is now a unified key of fixed size that I can use from now on. ماشي؟ طيب. From this pairwise master key we generate what we call pairwise transient keys اللي هو ال session keys اللي هي ال temporary session keys. ماشي كده؟ So this pairwise transient keys is actually three different keys. It's not one key. It's actually three different keys, and we'll talk about each one of them. And these transient keys are now valid for one session or temporary. Okay? So after some time, we can in fact use the pairwise master key to generate other set of keys and so on if we need. ماشي? So we'll talk about the pairwise transient key and the three different keys. So the pairwise transient key is composed of three different keys. The first two keys, okay, are not used for data encryption or confidentiality or anything like this. It's not for data خالص. We'll see the key confirmation keys, it actually supports the integrity of the control messages that get sent from the station to the access point. And we'll talk about this in a minute. And even the key encryption key. So we have the key confirmation key and key encryption key. Key encryption key here is the key that is used to communicate other keys to the station. And we'll talk about when do we need this. Okay? In other words, those two are not used for data encryption. Those are used for other purposes, which we will talk about, very specific purposes. This is the temporal key is the one that we use for encrypting data. This is provide the actual protection of unicast user traffic. Unicast user traffic. Because for multicast and broadcast, something else. We'll talk about this. So pairwise transient key are three keys: key confirmation key, key encryption key, and the temporal.
Doctor, the temporal key changes every session, or it is fixed? It's not changing.
All the three keys are per session. So after some time, you can renew them. You can generate another set of keys. ماشي؟ بس still based على ال pairwise master key. Pairwise master key. طيب, so ماشي, so until now we have been able to generate keys to protect unicast transfer. Okay, but definitely in wireless LANs we send also multicast and broadcast data. So when we send broadcast or multicast data, we need to send it using a key which should be shared between multiple stations. صح? So this key needs to be known by multiple stations in that case, not by just... So as we said, pairwise master key or the master session key is exclusive for one station, right? But for broadcast and multicast, we need a key which is shared between... So this key is what we call a group master key. So again, from the pairwise master key, we generate also the group master key. Okay? طيب. From the group master key كمان, we have to generate what we call group temporal key. What is the difference between the group master key and the group temporal key? The group temporal key is temporary But here, it doesn't change with time only. No, it has to be changed every time a node gets away or comes into the group. So any kind of change happens to the broadcast group or the multicast group, you have to renew this. Why? Why? Because assume that now we have like 3 set of stations or 4 set of stations, okay? And all of them, they use the same group transient key, right? And this station has moved away, okay? If I still use the same group transient key, this station might perform an attack because it has deassociated itself, but it can inject some messages, malicious content in the wireless LAN through knowing this group transient key. So every time a node moves away or a node comes in, I have to renew the group transient key. So the way I do this is to generate group transient key from hash function based on the group master key. Plus طبعا other parameters which usually have to do with the MAC addresses of the stations participating in this group. Oh, and the access points, yes. ماشي كده؟ All right, so this is the difference between the group master key and the group transient key. Here is changed every time a device leaves the network. So that's the most important thing. So it's temporary, but here بقى, not only based on time, based on event as well. If a node goes out, a node comes in, it has to be renewed. Any questions so far?
An example, what type of data that we should transfer through broadcast or
كتير جدا. كتير. Sometimes يعني حتى protocol messages have to be sent multicast and broadcast. كتير جدا. طيب, so now بقى we talk about the key management phase. In the key management phase بقى, still remember the port was still blocked. So the key management phase here starts with the fact that first the station delivers what we call بقى the nonce, right? Because now we need to generate the pairwise transient key, okay, from the pairwise master key, okay. Usually we use 2 things. We use the MAC of the station, here the MAC of the station and the MAC of the access point, and what we call nonce. Nonce are similar كده to the initial vectors or to some, it's like some arbitrary randomized sequence that also strengthens the key generation process, okay? So there is a nonce that gets generated by the access point and it gets sent to the station, okay? The station will then say, okay, so I will also generate nonce locally. So here this nonce is also based on the station and the access point. So now the pairwise transient key is a result of a hash function which includes pairwise master key, the MAC address of the access point and the base station, and the nonce of the station and the access point. Okay. So first, the access point will send the nonce, and the station will generate will be able to, in this case, to generate nonce locally at the access at the station point, and then generate the pairwise transient key. Okay, and then it sends the nonce of the station so that the access point would do the same thing, right? Okay. ماشي كده؟ طيب, here بقى this message confirms the authentication by using what we call بقى key confirmation key. Key confirmation key is used to perform authentication part here for the station, which confirms that the pairwise transient key has been generated correctly. Okay? Okay, كده? So here we use the key confirmation key to generate some kind of a MAC code that the station sends to the access point that confirms that the pairwise transient key process has been generated successfully. In order to confirm this, we use what we call a key confirmation key. The key confirmation key, we use it to generate a MAC, and then we send it to the access point. If the access point can verify this MAC, this means that station is confirmed, the pairwise transient key process has been confirmed. So at this point only, remember, at this point, we have the pairwise transient key, okay, which is valid for data transmission for unicast. Okay, for unicast between the station and the access point only. ماشي كده? And here we see control block is unblocked for unicast transfer only. Because at this point, we have been able to generate and verify the pairwise transient key. خلاص? So that's done. So what's remaining now is that we also have to generate the group master key and group transient key. Okay? And of course here, by the way, here برضو the group master key has been generated. Because the group master key is for multicast and broadcast, but what needs to be done is to generate by the group transient key. Okay? So here the access point delivers a new group transient key. This group transient key is based on the group master key, and it gets sent to the stations. Okay? How do you think this is done? Can we send this group transient, because it says delivers the group transient key. Can we deliver a key in plain text? What do we do here? لا مش هاشing. لا هنا hashing is not enough. لا here this message is encrypted. Encrypted using ايه بقى؟ Can you guess? بالظبط، برافو عليك. يس بالظبط، اللي هو الكي انكريبشن كي اللي هو الكي التاني. فان احنا قلنا pairwise transient keys ما صعب ان انتوا تحفظوهم دلوقتي يعني، بس يعني you will be able to memorize them. So the pairwise transient key is composed of 3 keys. Key confirmation key, which we have used here to verify the process of by generating this MAC, صح? And the key encryption key. Key encryption key is used to encrypt this message, okay, that contains the group transient key. This part is really enjoyable because I can ask you thousands of questions. I can ask you thousands of questions here. Okay? So the key encryption key is used to encrypt this message, okay, which contains the group transient key. So in that case, remember here, I have to deliver it one by one. I have to send it. I use station 1's temporal key, key encryption key to send the group transient key, and then send it to the other one. Once I finish all of this, then all of them would contain the group transient key. They can use it for broadcast communication. Okay, and each time one of them leaves or comes in, I have to do all of this. I have to go back, generate another group transient key, and deliver it to all of them. Then they can communicate. ماشي? This is what I was talking about when we talk about if we use this for ad hoc بقى, some nodes leave and come in and stuff like that, you have to use some kind of prediction to know when do you have to communicate these types of keys. Managing these keys becomes really يعني a very complicated process especially for ad hoc networks اللي هي multi UAVs يعني for ad hoc networks. Okay, تمام كده. So this message would be encrypted if I have the pairwise transit key, or specifically the key encryption key, I will be able to decrypt this, and then I will provide the confirmation that I have received. So this has to be done for all the stations. ماشي كده؟ فالحمد لله, so we have managed to provide the complete authentication for unicast and for multicast and broadcast. So we either use the TKIP protocol, which is for backward compatibility with WEP and WPA, and in that case it's based on RC4, or we can use the counter mode cipher blockchaining MAC protocol for the case of 802.11. So this provides this provides the pre-shared key or the master session key from which we generate the pairwise master key, which can be used for providing message integrity and confidentiality. ماشي? So to generate the pairwise master key from the to generate the pairwise transit key from the master key, as we said, we use some kind of hashing or pseudo-random function, and in that case the standard recommends the use of a HMAC with SHA-1 for the hashing. It's just recommendation. Yeah. So that's the summary for this part. So in this part, as we said, it's divided into 3 parts. The first part, we talked about the intrinsic characteristics that exist in wireless that makes wireless really should have a special treatment in terms of security. And then we talked about the Wi-Fi alliance and the history of the Wi-Fi and the terminology of basic service set and so on. And then in the third part, we talked about the security protocol, whether WEP, WPA, or WPA2, which is 802.11. Okay? So from network access security part, we have provided a control port for protected data transfer, okay, which secures communication. صح? Okay. Why do we need to have IPsec? What is the motivation behind IPsec? Okay? Because we said that for network access control security, we have a workstation, okay, and we have a network or distribution system, right? So we have like some kind of access point or switch or something like this, right? And then we created some kind of a secure port, whether it's logical or physical, ماشي, it doesn't matter, ماشي. So this port is controlled, and everything here is secure and encrypted and everything. ماشي? Why do we need to have IPsec? IPsec talks about security in the network layer. صح? Okay? So why do we need that? أما احنا everything is secure from the bottom. Everything is secure from the bottom. Okay? So why do we need to have higher layer security? Why do you think we need to have higher layer security?
Because now you have all the nodes are interconnected together.
All the
stations
connected to the distribution system or to the core network through some secure ports. So these ports are secure. Everything is encrypted. مفيش مشكلة.
So far all the nodes test each other. So the application would be without any security because they all pass the security border. So we need to have a layer of security to secure the communication between the node inside the distribution system, the station.
لا تقصد النودز اللي هنا يعني؟
لا, the stations, because now all the stations are interconnected through the network.
Yeah, there is a station here, there is a station here, which is also connected through some secure port, whether it's physical or logical, and we have the same thing for all stations. All of them are connected to the network through some secure ports. whether logical or physical.
What if one of these nodes start to behave maliciously?
How bad?
For example,
Because
Uh-huh.
if an attacker gets the information of one of the nodes exists
Uh-huh.
that already had access in this network, and then try to access this network by knowing the information about one of the nodes that exists in the network.
So one node is compromised.
yeah,
Yes.
Mesh. Okay. What would this entail? What would this cause? How can I perform an attack or damage the network from this if the port here is secure?
It will be like an open point
Uh-huh.
to the attacker,
Uh-huh.
so it can access the network through this node.
Okay, access the network. So this node can access some servers here.
yes,
Okay.
because they are now the server says this node is connected to the
Okay.
network. It should be
Mesh.
trusted.
Okay, that's one possible way. But this can be secured through other things other than IPsec. It can be secured using Kerberos. It can be حتى TLS. TLS can secure this. So what happens here is that securing this port does not guarantee the security of all the applications that run on this workstation. Okay, so we can use TLS, as we will study later, to secure the communication between one application and another application on the other endpoint, because this is transport layer security. So we'll talk about this, right? But if some of these applications, for example, does not use TLS, which means that they are not secure, ماشي? They can in fact inject some messages in the routing layer that can really paralyze the network completely. We call it network injection. Okay? These network injection messages, right, which can be done by one of these applications, it can inject some route updates to the network. Of course, it goes through the secure port, but once it goes here, خلاص, it's done. So these messages will be injected in the network, right? And will be able to corrupt the routers. It will be able to corrupt the routing tables of this, which means it corrupts the network infrastructure أصلا. It can paralyze the network infrastructure. Okay? So securing the port from the network access point of view does not guarantee the security of all applications that run on this workstation. What we have achieved so far is that we have authenticated this workstation, okay, to have secure communication with the access point or the switch, okay, which is point to point. But that does not guarantee the security of all applications running on this station, and does not guarantee that these applications will not inject some messages that corrupts the network infrastructure. So IPsec is developed to secure the network infrastructure. ماشي كده؟ So this is the motivation behind IPsec. IPsec is developed to secure network infrastructure, okay, by providing secure tunnels, okay, between a host and a host, or a host and a network, or from a network to network. Okay, so this is what we need to talk about. So IP security itself, it has been developed or issued in 1994 by the Internet Architecture Board, and it identifies key areas for security mechanism to need to secure the network infrastructure, as we said, from unauthorized monitoring or control of network traffic. So you just need one unsecure application running on this workstation to inject some network traffic messages that can corrupt the network infrastructure easily. So IPsec is designed for this. So we need to secure the end user to end user or a network to network, because we said that network layer provides a service from one host to another or from network to network. صح? So this included the authentication and the encryption as necessary, and here we're talking about IP4 and IP6. So IP version 4 and IP version 6, يعني the security for them is slightly different. For IP version 6 is, of course, it's much more complicated. So we'll try to simplify that as much as we can. IP6 specifications now exists as a set of internet standards. It's not just one document. It's not one specification for IP6. IP6 is actually a collection of standard documents and specification documents. A lot of them, right? So talk about some of these. So IPsec provides the capability to secure communication across LANs or private and public WANs. So as we all know, يعني service providers or like YouTube, Google مثلا, or Microsoft, they use, in fact, IPsec to interconnect their offices over the internet. صح? That's a very important thing, because imagine that you have to connect offices or interconnect offices that exist in different locations, okay, by having to dig and provide your own network infrastructure to secure it. يعني it's not feasible, صح? But using the internet also might provide a huge attack surface that can drive some attacks to all your offices. So also that's يعني برضو not possible. So IPsec came into the middle to try to solve that puzzle, or to try to solve this problem by creating some secure tunnels on an untrusted network infrastructure, okay, to make sure that the network infrastructure is secure.
Is it the same VPN?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, VPN uses IPsec. Or VPN uses IPsec. ماشي. So some of these examples طبعا include يعني naturally secure branch office connectivity over the internet, as we said. يعني we could, if you have this is one office and that's another office, okay, which exists in different geographical area. So one thing is to try to build your own network infrastructure بقى and dig your own lines and stuff like that, which is يعني not possible. So in the middle here you have the internet. So instead of building your private network infrastructure, you can build or you can establish logical tunnels over the internet. Logical tunnels over the internet. This tunnel is considered a logical private network over the internet infrastructure. Okay. Or secure remote access over the internet, which is what we use nowadays, like VPN. Okay, so if I'm actually traveling abroad, I can use VPN to connect to my network, and some networks actually they enforce this. So you cannot check your email, you cannot do anything on the organizational network except if you use VPN. Okay, so you have to have a secure tunnel, so that by this way we have to secure our network from any untrusted network. So when we use VPN, we create a tunnel, an access, a secure access from this node, external node, to the local. And by doing this, we actually get an IP address which is local in our organization. So it's as if you are logically inside the enterprise network. So you can access by any server, you can access any service, and so on. Establishing extranets, which is what we talked about. Extranet is what is actually interconnecting intranets. Intranet is if this office and this office, they are owned by the same organization, we call this a intranet, right? if we want to connect مثلا Microsoft to Google, it's extranet. So extranet is a private, secure network which is owned by multiple organizations. Intranet is owned by one organization. That's the main difference. ماشي? Or enhancing electronic commerce security. And by that we mean electronic commerce اللي هو e-commerce. So e-commerce is just for us is like website. But is it really a website? It's not. It's not just website, because there is a whole supply chain and a whole ecosystem behind the e-commerce. It's not just website, right? So you interact with the website, but there is in the back scene there is huge ecosystem that interconnects a service provider with some suppliers, some delivery, some things like that. So all of these form an ecosystem which has to be a secure, so they can communicate with each other using a IPsec as well, so in some kind of extranet. ماشي? So the principal feature of IPsec is that it can encrypt and authenticate all traffic at the IP level. So when we say encrypt at a certain layer, this means that the minimum you could do is that you have to encrypt the payload in this layer. But the header, usually, the header is exposed. Because in this layer, you need the header in order to process. Okay? So usually, يعني مثلا, yes, for network, okay, if I encrypt both the header and the payload, how would the routers perform routing? Right? So the routers, they need the header to be exposed. But we will see, we will get around this, and we will also encrypt at least part of the header, as we will see. ماشي كده؟ So this is how it looks like. So from the network model point of view, you have some private network here. In this private network, as you can see, the traffic could be unprotected. It's like a private network, and in this private network, we could actually use unprotected because, again, it's a private network. It's well contained, and we don't need any security in that case. But this is connected to either a router or to a firewall, which uses some kind of secure tunnel between this router and other routers, or this firewall and other firewalls. And this tunnel secures the communication between these two networks. Okay? So in that case, as we will see later, we call it tunnel mode. And in this tunnel mode, we connect two networks using a secure tunnel, using IPsec. We'll see how this is done. Okay? Or we can create also this tunnel between one station and the network. So this is also through tunnel mode, and it can connect a station to a lower VPN. Okay? So we can create a tunnel between routers, or we can create a tunnel from a node or workstation to the network. Okay? Type. At the protocol level, as we said, we have the IP payload and the original IP header. Why we say the original IP header? Because in fact, when we add IPsec to that, in one mode, we'll talk about this, in one mode, what we do is that we encrypt even the original IP header. Okay? But in that case, if we do this, then we have to add a new IP header, or we call it outer IP header. Okay? Which means that inside this tunnel, the routers, they will not have the final destination of the host that this packet should go to. They don't have this. Even this is hidden. But what they have is the destination router. So this outer IP will have the destination router where this packet should go at the end of the tunnel. So I will not give it the ultimate destination. I give it only the end of the tunnel. Okay? So the routers here, inside here, they will use that end of the tunnel for routing. They don't use the ultimate destination for routing. واضح النقطة دي؟ Okay? This is actually one of the modes of IPsec, but in fact, this IPsec header or ESP header, it can exist actually before here, in which case we actually encrypt only the IP header and this IP is exposed. In that case, the tunnel, in fact, is established between the end-to-end hosts. So you establish the tunnel between host and another host on the other end. Okay? So in that case, the original IP header itself is open, is exposed. واضح كده؟ تمام؟ So that's the different modes. طيب, some of the benefits of IPsec. So when IPsec is implemented in the firewall or the router, it provides strong security that can be applied to all traffic. So in that case, all the applications running on this host are by default secure from the network layer perspective. So there's no network injection whatsoever. We cannot have any network injection, and we'll see how the policies can enforce these types of traffic not to exist, not to be malicious and not to invade the network in any way. So by default, if I secure a router or I secure a host, this means all the applications will be secure. IPsec in a firewall resistant to bypass if all the traffic from the outside must use IP and the firewall, which means that this tunnel, by the way, just the fact that I create this tunnel, that does not enforce all the traffic from all the applications to have to go through this tunnel. Okay? Why بقى? Why? يعني I'm established a tunnel end to end between two hosts or between two routers, but there is certain type of traffic that does not have to go through this tunnel. Okay? And that in fact happens even with VPN. Not sure if you know that or you encounter this. You create like a VPN tunnel, but you see some traffic is not going through that VPN tunnel. Okay? Does that sound weird?
As a client,
Mm-hmm. You are sending a traffic from one of the applications on this host. Okay? This traffic will get to the beginning of the tunnel and somehow will not go through the tunnel. Will go through the internet normal. Will not go through the tunnel at all. طب ما ده ممكن يعمل network injection? No. In that case, the IPsec policies have to make sure that this type of traffic, okay, is already secure through other means. يعني for example, if a traffic is coming in to the router and the router finds that this traffic is using TLS, okay? Okay, so if the traffic is already secure, if the application is already providing some secure traffic, why do I have to repeat the job? Why do I have to go through the tunnel? Because going through the tunnel is expensive, by the way. Going through the tunnel, this means that you have to add the IPsec headers, you have to go through keys, and we'll see. And it's very complicated. It's not easy. So going through IPsec has some significant overhead. Okay? So if the traffic is already secure through TLS, why do I have to go through the overhead of IPsec? Okay? So in that case, I can actually bypass this type of traffic away from the tunnel. And this in fact happens. Yani, these types of policies are configured in the VPN itself, that there is certain type of traffic that goes away from the tunnel. ماشي? So IPsec, this is what we talked about. So IPsec is below the transport layer, right? So the transport layer itself may provide some level of security, but this transport layer security is providing security in what level? Application to application security. Okay, application to application, not host to host and not network to network. صح? So it secures the traffic that comes from one application endpoint only. واضح? So hence there is no need to change software on the user or server system when IPsec is implemented in the firewall or the router. So as we said, if the application is providing some secure traffic, even if it goes through routers, it can actually bypass the tunnel. It can go through the internet directly. Okay, it doesn't have to go through the tunnel. IPsec can be transparent to end users, hence there is no need to train users on security mechanisms. So if we provide a tunnel between two routers, okay, then the users themselves, they don't have to configure anything. صح? They don't have to see anything. So we provide the secure tunnel between two routers. خلاص, the users, they don't have to know about it. Everything is protected through that tunnel. So IPsec can provide security for individual users if needed, اللي هو ايه? For individual users, which means that we can provide security based on the traffic coming from certain user. Okay, as we will see, there are some policies in IPsec that you can configure to based on any criteria, based on a user, based on IP address, based on MAC address, based on a combination between all of these. So there are certain criteria through which you can configure the IP policy. طبعا the IPsec itself can be used to secure by all types of routing level messages. Briefly, يعني, this here talks about route advertisement that comes from routers. Now these route advertisements in the tunnel are secure. Okay, so from router to router, everything is secure. A router seeking to establish a neighbor relationship, اللي هي بنسميها adjacency messages. Or we send back and forth some hello messages in order to establish adjacency. These types of messages are also secure through IPsec. Redirect messages coming from one router to another. So if a traffic coming to a router and the router needs to redirect it to another router, these types of messages is also secure. Or route update, اللي هي بنسميها routing messages. These route updates are also secure. Okay. يعني in brief, يعني all types of routing level messages, whether بقى اللي هي using ICMP or IP messages, كل ده بي secure. These are the standard documents بقى. The standard documents here, as we see, we have طبعا the basic ones. The basic ones here are these two. We have the encapsulating security payload, اللي هو ESP, and the authentication header. Those two are the core ones or the core specifications. These are the ones that provide the header for authentication. طبعا authentication is done using authentication header, and for all types of encryption بقى and confidentiality and so on is provided using the encapsulating payload service. Worth noting here is that there is IPsec 1 and IPsec 2. Okay, IPsec 1 separates the ESP from AH. Okay, so for IPsec 1, the standards for AH was totally separate from the ESP. So AH is used for authentication, and ESP is used for confidentiality, encryption, and as we will talk about it, session keys and so on. Okay, ماشي كده? So those were separate. In IPsec 2, the AH is actually optional, has become optional. Okay, and both functionality can be done using ASP, which means ASP itself can be used for authentication and confidentiality, both. Okay, so that's why in the previous slide we have seen ASP header, we have not seen AH header. That's because in IPsec 2, ESP header can in fact provide both functionalities, the authentication and confidentiality, both. Okay, but still AH has been left as optional in IPsec 2, again for a backward compatibility. ماشي. طبعا there is the overview document, which is the architecture document, which we will see now how the architecture looks like. There is also the IKE. IKE is the back end server, lower IKE, which is what we talked about for authentication. So first we have to authenticate against the IKE server, which is what we will talk about. And this document here, lower cryptographic algorithms, this talks about all the set of security mechanisms which are being used by IPsec, whether by AES or AES counter mode, things like that, MAC mechanisms and so on. So these are detailed here. And there is, of course, other types of high-level services like مثلا policies, policy configuration, and so on, which is detailed in the other. ماشي؟ طيب خلينا نقف هنا عشان ما وعدتكم.